The snow fell thick and silent over Ashford Hall on Christmas Eve 1818, blanketing the crumbling estate in deceptive beauty. Inside the great hall, Lady Rosalind Hartley stood before the Duke of Ashford, her hands trembling beneath her gloves. She had arrived as his contracted bride, a transaction arranged by her bankrupt father to settle debts. The Duke, a man of 30 with storm-grey eyes and a reputation for ruthlessness, had expected a decorative wife to grace his table. What he did not expect was the leather-bound ledger she placed before him at midnight, filled with calculations that revealed the true architect of his estate's ruin, his own trusted steward, who had been systematically bleeding the duchy dry for 5 years. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what part of the world you're listening from. I want to know how far it's travelled. Rosalind Hartley had learned early that beauty was both blessing and curse. At 19, she possessed the delicate features and auburn hair admired in London's finest drawing rooms, but it was her mind that set her apart. A mind her father had considered wasted on a daughter. While her younger brother received tutors in mathematics and estate management, Rosalind had taught herself by candlelight, poring over her father's discarded account books and agricultural journals. The morning of her departure from Hartley Manor, she stood in her childhood bedroom, watching servants pack her trousseau into leather trunks. Her father, Lord Edmund Hartley, had gambled away 3 generations of wealth at the card tables of White's. The marriage contract with the Duke of Ashford was his final desperate manoeuvre, Rosalind's hand in exchange for the settlement of £40,000 in debts. "You should be grateful," her mother had said the previous evening, adjusting the pearl necklace that would soon be sold. "The Duke of Ashford is one of the wealthiest men in England. You'll want for nothing." But Rosalind had heard the whispers. The Duke was a widower, his first wife having died in childbirth 3 years prior. He was known for his cold efficiency, his ability to turn failing investments into gold, and his complete lack of sentimentality. He needed an heir and a hostess. She was simply the most convenient solution. The journey north to Derbyshire took 3 days through increasingly harsh winter weather. Rosalind travelled with only her lady's maid, Martha, a woman of 50, who had served the Hartley family since before Rosalind's birth. As their carriage climbed into the Peak District, the landscape grew wild and beautiful, rolling hills giving way to dramatic moorland. "They say Ashford Hall has 200 rooms," Martha offered, trying to lift her mistress's spirits. "And the Duke keeps a stable of 30 horses." Rosalind gazed out at the grey December sky. "They also say he dismissed his last housekeeper for moving a vase without permission." Ashford Hall emerged from the mist like something from a Gothic novel, a sprawling Jacobean mansion of grey stone with mullioned windows that caught the weak winter light. But as their carriage drew closer, Rosalind's trained eye noticed troubling details. Several windows on the east wing were boarded. The formal gardens showed signs of neglect, with overgrown hedges and untended paths. The fountain in the circular drive stood dry and cracked. A household of this size should have shown more activity, more life. Instead, an eerie quiet hung over the estate. The Duke himself met her in the great hall, a cavernous space with a hammer-beam ceiling and portraits of stern ancestors lining the walls. Sebastian Ashford, 6th Duke of Ashford, stood before the massive fireplace with the bearing of a man accustomed to absolute authority. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples, despite his relative youth. His grey eyes assessed her with the same detachment one might use to evaluate livestock. "Lady Rosalind," he said, his voice deep and measured, "I trust your journey was tolerable." "Your Grace," she curtsied, keeping her eyes lowered as propriety demanded. "We shall be married in the chapel on Christmas Day, 3 days hence. Mrs. Blackwood will show you to your chambers. We dine at 8. He turned away before she could respond, his boots echoing on the flagstone floor as he disappeared down a corridor. Mrs. Blackwood, the housekeeper, was a thin woman with a pinched face and suspicious eyes. She led Rosalind through a maze of corridors, past rooms shrouded in holland covers, to a suite in the south wing. "The Duchess's chambers," Mrs. Blackwood announced, opening double doors to reveal a beautifully appointed bedroom with silk wallpaper and a four-poster bed. But here, too, Rosalind noticed signs of economy. Candles that had burned too low, a fire that was barely adequate for the room's size, curtains that showed wear at the edges. That first evening, Rosalind dressed for dinner in a gown of deep blue silk, one of the few fine things she had left. Martha arranged her hair in an elegant chignon, weaving in a ribbon that matched the dress. "You look every inch a duchess, my lady," Martha said softly. But Rosalind felt like an imposter, a girl playing dress-up in someone else's life. The dining room could have seated 40, but only 2 places were set, at opposite ends of a table that stretched the length of the room. The Duke arrived precisely at 8, changed into evening dress, his cravat tied with mathematical precision. They ate in near silence, served by footmen who moved like ghosts. The food was excellent: roasted pheasant, winter vegetables, a delicate trifle, but the portions were smaller than one would expect at a ducal table. "Your father speaks highly of your accomplishments," the Duke said finally, his tone suggesting he doubted this claim. "He mentioned you read French and Italian, Your Grace, also Latin and Greek." His eyebrow lifted fractionally, unusual for a young lady. "My father's library was extensive before he sold it." Something flickered in his eyes. Perhaps sympathy, perhaps merely acknowledgement of her family's fall. "You'll find Ashford Hall's library adequate. You may use it as you wish." "Thank you, Your Grace. You should know what I expect from this marriage, Lady Rosalind. I require an heir. I require a hostess capable of managing this household and representing the duchy at social functions. I require discretion and obedience. In return, you will have security, status, and freedom to pursue whatever genteel hobbies occupy your time. Do you understand?" Rosalind met his gaze directly for the first time. "Perfectly, Your Grace." After dinner, unable to sleep, she explored the corridors near her chambers. The house seemed to hold its breath around her, full of shadows and secrets. She found herself in a portrait gallery where generations of Ashfords stared down with varying degrees of hauteur. She paused before a recent painting, a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, holding a baby wrapped in lace. "The late Duchess," a voice said behind her. Rosalind turned to find an elderly man in a butler's livery. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude." "No intrusion, my lady. I'm Graves, head butler. That's Her Grace, Lady Catherine, and the young master who didn't survive." "I'm so sorry." Graves nodded slowly. His Grace was a different man before. Laughed more, smiled more. Now he works himself to exhaustion, trying to hold everything together. Hold everything together. But Graves seemed to realize he'd said too much. "I bid you good night, my lady." Rosalind returned to her chambers with a growing unease. Something was wrong at Ashford Hall, something beyond grief and winter gloom. The signs were everywhere for those who knew how to look. The reduced staff, the neglected maintenance, the careful economies masked by remaining grandeur. She had been sent here as a decorative solution to a duke's need for an heir, but Rosalind suspected the Duke of Ashford's problems ran far deeper than a lack of wife. Christmas Day dawned cold and bright, the sun glinting off snow-covered grounds. Rosalind woke to Martha drawing back the curtains and the realization that this was her wedding day. A day she had once imagined would be filled with joy and love, not duty and transaction. "The seamstress brought your dress, my lady," Martha said quietly, gesturing to where a gown of ivory silk hung like a ghost. "It's beautiful." It was beautiful. Layers of silk and lace, embroidered with seed pearls, the kind of gown that should have made any bride's heart sing. Instead, Rosalind felt only a hollow resignation as Martha helped her dress, arranged her hair, and placed a wreath of winter roses on her head. The chapel at Ashford Hall was a jewel of medieval architecture, with stained glass windows that cast coloured light across stone floors. But as Rosalind entered on the arm of the Duke's cousin, Lord Pemberton, who would give her away in her father's absence, she noticed the sparse attendance. Perhaps 20 people filled the front pews, mostly servants and a handful of local gentry. The Duke stood at the altar in formal dress, his face an impassive mask. The vicar, Reverend Aldridge, was a portly man with nervous hands who rushed through the ceremony as though eager to finish. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God." Rosalind barely heard the words. She made her responses mechanically, felt the Duke's hand, cold and impersonal, take hers as he slipped a heavy gold ring onto her finger. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, the Duke's kiss was perfunctory, a brief brush of lips that held no warmth. The wedding breakfast was held in the great hall, where tables had been arranged for the small gathering. Rosalind sat beside her new husband at the head table, smiling until her face ached, accepting congratulations from people whose names she couldn't remember. It was during the toasts that everything unraveled. Mr. Cornelius Blackwell, the Duke's steward, rose to speak. He was a man of perhaps 45, with thinning hair and the soft hands of someone who worked with ledgers rather than land. Rosalind had met him briefly the previous day. He'd seemed obsequious and overly familiar with the Duke. "Your Graces, honoured guests," Blackwell began, his voice carrying across the hall. "It is my privilege to have served the Ashford estate for 15 years, through times of prosperity and challenge." The Duke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "As steward, I have always endeavoured to provide His Grace with complete transparency regarding the estate's finances, which is why I must take this opportunity, on this joyous occasion, to address a matter of some urgency." A murmur rippled through the guests. This was highly irregular. "Your Grace," Blackwell turned to address the Duke directly, "I have prepared the quarterly accounts for your review. I'm afraid they reveal that despite our best efforts, the estate continues to operate at a significant loss. The tenant farms are underperforming, the investments in railway shares have failed to yield expected returns, and the costs of maintaining a property of this size continue to mount." The Duke's face remained impassive, but Rosalind saw his knuckles whiten as he gripped his wineglass. "I mention this now," Blackwell continued, his tone oozing false concern, "because Her Grace should understand the reality of her new position. The settlement paid to Lord Hartley has, I'm afraid, severely depleted our liquid reserves. We may need to consider further economies, perhaps closing additional wings of the house, reducing staff, selling some of the artwork or plate." The silence that followed was excruciating. Every eye in the room fixed on the Duke, waiting for his response. Rosalind felt the humiliation wash over her. She was not just a purchased bride, but an expensive burden that had pushed the estate toward ruin. Lady Thornbury, a sharp-featured woman who Rosalind had learned was the Duke's aunt, spoke up. "Surely this discussion could have waited for a more appropriate time, Mr. Blackwell." "With respect, my lady, financial realities do not observe social niceties. His Grace has been reluctant to face certain hard truths. Perhaps a wife's practical influence will help him see reason." The Duke stood slowly, his movements controlled, but radiating barely suppressed fury. "This breakfast is concluded. I thank you all for attending." Guests began to disperse quickly, eager to escape the awkward scene. Rosalind sat frozen, her wedding breakfast congealing on her plate, feeling the weight of every pitying glance. As the hall emptied, the Duke turned to Blackwell. "My study. Now." "Of course, Your Grace. I have the ledgers prepared." "Now." After they left, Lady Thornbury approached Rosalind. She was a handsome woman in her 60s, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "My dear child, I apologize for that unseemly display. Blackwell has always been presumptuous, but this exceeded all bounds." "Is it true?" Rosalind asked quietly. "Is the estate truly in such dire condition?" Lady Thornbury hesitated. "Sebastian has faced challenges since Catherine's death, but I've always suspected—" She stopped, seeming to reconsider her words. "You should rest, my dear. It's been an overwhelming day." But Rosalind couldn't rest. She retreated to her chambers where Martha helped her out of the wedding gown, but her mind churned with questions. Something about Blackwell's performance had struck her as theatrical, calculated. Why humiliate the Duke publicly? Why reveal financial difficulties at a wedding breakfast? That evening she was expected to join the Duke for dinner, but a footman brought word that His Grace was indisposed and would dine in his study. Rosalind ate alone in her chambers, the isolation of her new life settling over her like a shroud. Later, Unable to sleep, she wrapped herself in a dressing gown and ventured into the quiet corridors. She found herself drawn toward the east wing. The section she'd noticed was partially closed. As she explored, she discovered rooms filled with furniture under Holland covers, paintings removed from walls leaving pale rectangles, spaces that spoke of a household contracting in on itself. She was examining a beautiful Chinese vase, one of the few valuable items still displayed, when she heard voices from a nearby room. The door was slightly ajar, and she recognized the Duke's voice, tight with anger. "Cannot continue this way, Blackwell. The numbers don't make sense. Your Grace, I've explained the agricultural difficulties, the failed investments. I'm not a fool. The tenant farms should be producing better yields. The railway shares were sound investments. Where is the money actually going? I resent the implication, Your Grace. I have served your family faithfully. Then you won't object to an independent audit." A pause, then Blackwell's voice, colder now. "An audit would be expensive, Your Grace, and given your current financial position, inadvisable. Unless you wish to sell more property, perhaps the London house, or we could approach Lady Rosalind's family for an additional settlement." Rosalind heard something slam. A fist on a desk, perhaps. "Get out, Your Grace. Get out before I forget myself." Rosalind hurried back toward her chambers, her heart pounding. She had heard enough to confirm her suspicions. The Duke wasn't a spendthrift or a poor manager. He was being systematically robbed by the man he trusted most. But proving it would be another matter entirely. The days following Christmas were among the bleakest of Rosalind's life. The Duke avoided her almost entirely, taking his meals in his study and spending long hours riding across the estate, despite the bitter cold. When they did encounter each other in corridors or doorways, he was coldly polite, treating her like an unwelcome guest rather than his wife. Rosalind understood his resentment. In his eyes, she represented the £40,000 that had drained his reserves, the final burden that might break the estate. The fact that she'd had no choice in the arrangement mattered little. On the third day of her marriage, Lady Thornbury returned to Ashford Hall. She found Rosalind in the library, surrounded by books on agricultural management and estate accounting. "My dear girl," Lady Thornbury said, settling into a chair by the fire. "What on earth are you reading?" Rosalind closed the volume on crop rotation. "I'm trying to understand." "Understand what?" "How an estate this size, with this much productive land, could be failing." Lady Thornbury studied her with new interest. "You have a head for figures? My father never thought so. But I kept the household accounts at Hartley Manor for 3 years before he sold everything. I know what proper management looks like, and I know what embezzlement looks like." The older woman's eyes widened. "You suspect Blackwell, don't you?" Lady Thornbury rose and closed the library door firmly before returning. "I've suspected for 2 years, but I have no proof, and Sebastian won't hear a word against him. Blackwell has been with the family since the old Duke's time. Sebastian trusts him implicitly. Then we need to find proof." My dear, this isn't your concern. I'm the Duchess of Ashford now." Rosalind interrupted quietly. "This estate is my home, my future. If it fails, I fail with it, and I won't sit idle while someone steals from my husband." Lady Thornbury smiled for the first time since Rosalind had met her. "You're not what I expected, child. Sebastian chose better than he knew. He didn't choose. He purchased, perhaps. But you're here now, and you have a mind. Let's use it." Over the following week, Lady Thornbury became Rosalind's ally and guide. She introduced her to the household staff, the tenant farmers, the local gentry. More importantly, she provided context. Stories of how the estate had functioned under the old Duke, how it had changed after Sebastian inherited, and how everything had deteriorated after Catherine's death. Sebastian threw himself into work after he lost Catherine and the baby, Lady Thornbury explained one afternoon as they walked through the portrait gallery. He trusted Blackwell to manage the details while he focused on larger investments. That's when things began to go wrong. Rosalind paused before Catherine's portrait again. She was very beautiful. She was very kind. The staff adored her. The tenants loved her. She had a gift for making people feel seen. Lady Thornbury touched Rosalind's arm gently. Sebastian loved her deeply. I don't say this to hurt you, but so you understand. He's not cruel by nature. He's wounded. I know. I don't expect his love, but I won't accept his contempt either. It was during a visit to the estate office, a building separate from the main house, that Rosalind made her first real discovery. Blackwell was away in the village, and his assistant, a nervous young man named Timothy Hodge, was managing the day's business. "Your Grace," Timothy stammered when Rosalind entered with Lady Thornbury. "I wasn't expecting, that is, Mr. Blackwell didn't mention." "We're simply familiarizing ourselves with the estate operations," Lady Thornbury said smoothly. "Don't let us disturb you." While Lady Thornbury engaged Timothy in conversation about tenant leases, Rosalind examined the office. It was meticulously organized, too organized perhaps. Ledgers lined the shelves in perfect rows, each spine labeled in Blackwell's precise hand. On the desk lay the current accounts book, open to a page of expenditures. Rosalind's eyes scanned the entries. Repairs to tenant cottages, seed purchases, equipment maintenance, all reasonable expenses. But something nagged at her. "Mr. Hodge," she said casually, "I notice there's an entry here for repairs to Meadowbrook Cottage. Quite extensive repairs, new roof, new windows. That must have been a significant project." Timothy glanced at the ledger. "Oh yes, Your Grace, though I believe those repairs were completed last spring." "Last spring? But this entry is dated November." Timothy's face went pale. I must be mistaken, Your Grace." But Rosalind saw the truth in his eyes. He knew something was wrong, but he was too frightened to speak. That evening, Rosalind requested an audience with the Duke. A footman returned with the message that His Grace would receive her in his study at 9 o'clock. The Duke's study was a masculine space of dark wood and leather, with maps of the estate covering one wall and shelves of agricultural journals lining another. The Duke sat behind a massive desk, his face illuminated by lamplight, looking exhausted. "Your Grace," Rosalind began, remaining standing when he didn't invite her to sit. "I wish to discuss the estate accounts." His expression hardened. "That's not your concern." "With respect, it is my concern. I'm your wife. This is my home. A home you were purchased for. Let's not pretend this is a real marriage, Lady Rosalind." The words stung, but she kept her voice steady. "No, let's not pretend. You needed money to save your estate, and my father needed money to save his reputation. We're both victims of circumstance, but that doesn't mean I'm useless." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "What do you want?" "I want to help. I have some experience with household accounts. I don't need a wife who dabbles in bookkeeping. I need—" He stopped, seeming to catch himself. "An heir," Rosalind finished quietly. "Yes, you've made that clear. But until that's accomplished, I need something to occupy my time. Let me review the accounts. If everything is in order, you've lost nothing. If I find discrepancies, you've gained valuable information. Blackwell has managed these accounts for 15 years. Then he won't mind a second set of eyes." The Duke was silent for a long moment. Finally he said, "You may review the household accounts only. The estate finances are beyond your scope." It wasn't everything she wanted, but it was a start. "Thank you, Your Grace." As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "Lady Rosalind, why do you care? You could live comfortably here regardless of the estate's financial health. You'd still be a duchess." She looked back at him. "Because I'm not decorative, Your Grace. I'm capable, and I won't watch everything crumble without trying to help." Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but perhaps a grudging respect. The next morning, Rosalind began her work in earnest. Mrs. Blackwood, under orders from the Duke, provided the household ledgers for the past 3 years. Rosalind set up a workspace in the morning room, spreading documents across a large table, and began the painstaking process of verification. Lady Thornbury visited daily, sometimes bringing her nephew, Dr. Marcus Aldridge, the vicar's younger brother who had recently returned from studying medicine in Edinburgh. Dr. Aldridge was perhaps 30, with an easy manner and intelligent eyes that held genuine interest when Rosalind explained what she was doing. "You're conducting an audit," he observed, examining her careful notations. "That's quite sophisticated work." "It's necessary work," Rosalind replied. "Numbers don't lie, Dr. Aldridge. People do." "Marcus, please." "And I agree entirely. I've often thought estate management could benefit from the same rigorous methodology we use in medicine: observation, hypothesis, testing." Their conversations became a bright spot in Rosalind's isolated existence. Marcus had a gift for explaining complex ideas clearly, and he listened to her theories about the estate's finances without condescension. Unlike her husband, he seemed to value her mind. It was Marcus who suggested she cross-reference the household accounts with actual deliveries. If the ledger shows payment for 10 cords of firewood, there should be 10 cords of firewood somewhere on the property. The idea was brilliant. Over the next week, Rosalind began a systematic inventory, working with the housekeeper and groundskeeper to verify that goods purchased had actually been received. The discrepancies began to mount. Firewood that existed only on paper. Foodstuffs never delivered. Repairs never completed. Someone was creating false entries and pocketing the difference. By mid-January, Rosalind had documented dozens of discrepancies in the household accounts alone, totaling nearly £3,000 over 3 years. If the same pattern held in the estate accounts, which were far larger, the theft could be staggering. She was working late one evening, her eyes burning from hours of reviewing documents by lamplight, when the Duke entered the morning room. She hadn't heard him approach, and she started when he spoke. "You're still at this?" "Yes, Your Grace." She stood, suddenly aware of how informal she must look, with her hair coming loose from its pins and ink stains on her fingers. He moved to the table, examining her careful charts and calculations. "What have you found?" "Systematic theft, Your Grace. Someone has been creating false entries in the household accounts for at least 3 years. The amounts are small enough to avoid immediate notice, but they accumulate significantly." "How much?" "Nearly £3,000 that I can document, possibly more." His face went very still. "Who?" "The entries are in Mr. Blackwell's hand, but that doesn't necessarily mean—" "It's Blackwell." The Duke's voice was flat, certain. "It's been Blackwell all along." He sank into a chair, and for the first time since she'd met him, Rosalind saw the mask crack. He looked devastated, betrayed. "I trusted him," the Duke said quietly. "After Catherine died, after I lost the baby, I couldn't manage everything. I gave him more authority, more freedom, and he used it to rob me blind." Rosalind moved closer, driven by instinct. "It's not your fault, Your Grace." "Isn't it? I should have seen it. I should have questioned, investigated. Instead, I buried myself in grief and let a thief destroy everything my family built. You were in pain. He exploited that. But we can stop him now." The Duke looked up at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since their wedding. "Why are you doing this? You owe me nothing." "I owe myself something," Rosalind said firmly. "I won't be useless, I won't be decorative, I won't stand by while wrong goes unpunished." Something kindled in his grey eyes. Respect, gratitude, perhaps the first spark of something more. "What do you need?" "Access to the estate accounts. All of them. If we're going to expose Blackwell, we need irrefutable proof." The Duke stood, decision made. "You'll have them tomorrow. And Lady Rosalind, thank you." It was the first time he'd thanked her for anything. The first time he'd spoken to her as a partner, rather than an obligation. As he left, Rosalind returned to her work with renewed energy. She had found her purpose at Ashford Hall, and perhaps, just perhaps, she had found a way to reach her husband's wounded heart. The estate accounts arrived the next morning in locked boxes, delivered personally by the Duke with a warning. "Blackwell cannot know you're reviewing these. He's already suspicious of your interest in the household ledgers." Rosalind worked with obsessive focus, often forgetting meals, losing track of time. The pattern of theft was even more extensive than she'd feared. Blackwell had been embezzling for at least 5 years, possibly longer. He'd created a complex web of false transactions. Phantom tenant payments, inflated repair costs, invented expenses for equipment and livestock that never existed. The amounts were staggering. By Rosalind's calculations, Blackwell had stolen upward of £70,000. "It's brilliant in a terrible way, Marcus observed when Rosalind shared her findings with him and Lady Thornbury. He's hidden the theft across hundreds of small transactions. No single entry is large enough to raise suspicion. But taken together, they've nearly destroyed the estate, Lady Thornbury said grimly. Sebastian must confront him. Not yet, Rosalind cautioned. We need more than suspicions. We need evidence that would stand up in court. If Blackwell has been this careful, he's likely hidden the money somewhere. We need to find it. It was Marcus who suggested they investigate Blackwell's own circumstances. A man stealing this much money must be spending it somewhere. Does he live extravagantly? Discreet inquiries revealed that Blackwell had recently purchased a substantial property in Cheshire, a country house with 50 acres, far beyond what a steward's salary could afford. He'd also made significant investments in his own name, including shares in a Manchester textile mill. He's been building his own fortune with stolen money, Rosalind said, the pieces falling into place. The question is, can we prove the money came from the estate? The answer came from an unexpected source. Timothy Hodge, Blackwell's assistant, appeared at Ashford Hall late one evening, asking to speak with the Duchess. He was brought to the morning room, where Rosalind was working. "Your Grace," Timothy said, his hands shaking, "I can't stay silent any longer. Mr. Blackwell he's been doing things that aren't right. I've tried to tell myself it wasn't my business, but after you asked about those repairs to Meadowbrook Cottage, I started paying attention." "Tell me everything," Rosalind said gently. Timothy's testimony was damning. He described how Blackwell had instructed him to create duplicate ledgers, one set showing inflated expenses for the Duke's review, another set with actual costs. He explained how Blackwell had established accounts with merchants who existed only on paper, paying them for goods never delivered and pocketing the money himself. "I have documents," Timothy said, producing a leather satchel. "I've been keeping copies. I was afraid, Your Grace, afraid of what Mr. Blackwell might do if he knew I suspected. But I can't watch him destroy the estate anymore." The documents Timothy provided were the final piece of evidence. With them, Rosalind could trace the stolen money from the estate accounts to Blackwell's personal investments. "You've been very brave, Mr. Hodge," Rosalind said, "and you may have saved Ashford Hall." That evening, she presented everything to the Duke in his study: the calculations, the false ledgers, Timothy's testimony, the documentation of Blackwell's purchases. The Duke reviewed it all in silence, his face growing harder with each page. £70,000, he said finally. "He stole £70,000. And we can prove every penny," Rosalind confirmed. "We have enough to bring criminal charges. He'll face prison." The Duke looked at her with something like awe. "You did this. In less than a month, you uncovered what I missed for 5 years. You were grieving." He counted on that. "I was a fool. You were human, Your Grace. We all are." He stood and moved to the window, looking out over the snow-covered grounds. "I need to confront him, publicly. I want everyone who witnessed that humiliation at our wedding breakfast to see him exposed. Then we'll host a dinner," Lady Thornbury suggested. She joined them for the revelation, her face flushed with vindicated anger. "Invite the local gentry, the same people who were at the wedding. Let Blackwell think he's still in your confidence. Then reveal everything." The dinner was arranged for the following Saturday. Invitations went out to 30 guests, including all the prominent families of the district. Blackwell, suspecting nothing, helped organize the event, even suggesting the menu. Rosalind spent the intervening days preparing. She had the documents organized, the evidence arranged in irrefutable sequence. She also, at Lady Thornbury's insistence, ordered a new gown from the local dressmaker, a creation of deep emerald silk that brought out the auburn in her hair. "You're not just the woman who exposed a thief," Lady Thornbury said firmly. "You're the Duchess of Ashford. You should look the part." The night of the dinner, Rosalind stood before her mirror, while Martha arranged her hair in an elaborate style woven with pearls. The woman looking back at her was different from the frightened girl who'd arrived at Ashford Hall 6 weeks earlier. She looked confident, purposeful, powerful. The Duke was waiting at the bottom of the main staircase when she descended. He was dressed in formal evening wear, and when he saw her, something flickered in his eyes. Appreciation, perhaps even admiration. "You look magnificent," he said, offering his arm. "Thank you, Your Grace." "Sebastian," he corrected quietly. "I think we're past formalities, don't you?" It was the first time he'd invited such intimacy. Rosalind felt a flutter of something unexpected. Not quite hope, but its precursor. The guests arrived promptly at 8. The dining room had been opened fully for the first time since Rosalind's arrival. All the candelabras lit, the best china and crystal displayed. It looked like the home of a wealthy duke, not a failing estate. Blackwell circulated among the guests, playing the role of trusted advisor, accepting compliments on the arrangements. He seemed entirely at ease, unsuspecting. Dinner was a lavish affair, multiple courses, fine wines, elegant service. Rosalind played the perfect hostess, conversing gracefully with the guests, making everyone feel welcome. She noticed Marcus watching her from across the table, his expression warm with approval. It was during dessert that the Duke rose to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for joining us this evening. When last we gathered at my wedding breakfast, there was some unpleasantness regarding the estate's finances. Uncomfortable glances were exchanged. Blackwell's smile became fixed. Mr. Blackwell, my steward, expressed concern about the estate's viability. He suggested that my marriage had depleted our reserves and that harsh economies would be necessary." The Duke's voice was calm, almost conversational. "I'm pleased to report that Mr. Blackwell was quite wrong." Blackwell's face went pale. "Your Grace, I merely presented the facts." "The facts, Mr. Blackwell, are these. For at least 5 years, you have been systematically embezzling from the Ashford estate. You have created false ledgers, invented expenses, and stolen approximately £70,000. Gasps echoed through the dining room. Blackwell stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly. "This is outrageous. Your Grace, I have served your family faithfully. You have served yourself," the Duke interrupted, his voice hard as iron. "My wife, the Duchess, has spent the past month conducting a thorough audit of the estate accounts. She has documented every false entry, every phantom expense, every penny you stole, and she has traced the money to your personal investments." All eyes turned to Rosalind. She stood, moving to stand beside her husband, presenting a united front. "Mr. Blackwell," she said clearly, "you purchased a property in Cheshire for £12,000. You invested in a textile mill in Manchester. You established accounts with merchants who don't exist. We have testimony from your assistant, Mr. Mahodge, describing how you created duplicate ledgers. We have documentation of every theft." Blackwell's face had gone from pale to red, fury and fear warring in his expression. "You stupid girl! You think you understand estate management? You're a child playing with numbers you can't comprehend." "I comprehend theft perfectly well," Rosalind said coldly, "as will the magistrate when we present our evidence tomorrow morning." "You've destroyed this estate," Blackwell shouted, abandoning all pretense. "The old Duke never questioned me. Sebastian was too weak, too distracted by his dead wife to notice. I built my fortune from the scraps of this failing duchy, and I earned every penny." "You earned nothing," the Duke said. "You're a thief and a liar. Graves, summon the constable." 2 footmen moved to block the doors as Blackwell looked wildly around the room, seeking escape or support. He found neither. The guests watched in horrified fascination as the man who had seemed so respectable revealed his true nature. The constable arrived within the hour. Blackwell was led away in chains, still protesting his innocence, still hurling insults at Rosalind and the Duke. After he was gone, the guests departed quickly, eager to spread the news. Only Lady Thornbury and Marcus remained. "Well," Lady Thornbury said, sinking into a chair, "that was dramatic." "That was justice," the Duke corrected. He turned to Rosalind, taking her hand, the first time he'd touched her voluntarily since their wedding. "You saved Ashford Hall. You saved my family's legacy. I can never repay that debt." "I don't want repayment," Rosalind said softly. "I want a partnership, a real marriage, built on respect and trust." "You have it," Sebastian said, and the warmth in his voice made her heart skip. "If you'll be patient with me. I've been lost for a long time, but you've shown me the way back." Marcus cleared his throat diplomatically. "I should take my leave. But Lady Rosalind, I wanted to say, you've been extraordinary. Your intelligence, your courage, your determination. Ashford Hall is fortunate to have you as its Duchess." After they left, Sebastian and Rosalind stood alone in the dining room, surrounded by the remnants of the evening. "I was wrong about you," Sebastian said quietly. "I thought you were just another burden, another expense. But you're the best thing that's happened to this estate in years. The best thing that's happened to me." "I'm not Catherine," Rosalind said, needing to address the ghost between them. "No, you're not. Catherine was kind and gentle and good. But you're brilliant and fierce and strong. I loved Catherine, and I always will. But I think I could love you too if you'll let me try." It wasn't a declaration of passion, but it was honest. And for Rosalind, who had expected nothing but duty, it was enough. "I'd like that," she said. Sebastian smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him, and raised her hand to his lips. "Then let's begin again, Lady Rosalind. Properly this time." The arrest of Cornelius Blackwell sent shockwaves through Derbyshire society. Within days, the story had spread to London, where it became the scandal of the season. The Duchess of Ashford, barely 20 years old and married less than 2 months, had exposed one of the most elaborate embezzlement schemes in recent memory. Letters poured into Ashford Hall, some offering congratulations, others seeking details. A few from other estates asking Rosalind to review their accounts. She declined the latter politely, focusing instead on the monumental task of rebuilding what Blackwell had destroyed. With the evidence of theft, the Duke's solicitors were able to seize Blackwell's assets, the Cheshire property, the textile mill investments, various bank accounts. It wouldn't recover everything, but it would return approximately £40,000 to the estate, enough to stabilise the finances and begin proper repairs. Timothy Hodge was promoted to steward, a position he accepted with nervous gratitude. Under Rosalind's guidance, he implemented new accounting procedures, double-entry bookkeeping, regular audits, transparent reporting. The estate began to function as it should have all along. But the most significant change was in Sebastian himself. The cold, distant Duke who had married Rosalind out of necessity began to thaw. He started joining her for breakfast, discussing estate business over coffee and toast. He invited her to ride with him across the property, showing her the tenant farms and explaining his plans for improvements. He asked her opinion on investments, on hiring decisions, on matters both large and small. "You have a gift for this," he said one afternoon as they reviewed proposals for new drainage systems. "You see patterns, connections. You think systematically." "My father called it unfeminine," Rosalind replied, making a notation on the proposal. "Your father was an idiot." Sebastian's bluntness made her laugh. "You're wasted on household management. You should be helping run the estate properly." "You trust me with that?" "I'd trust you with anything." The words, simple and sincere, meant more than any flowery declaration. Their relationship deepened gradually, built on mutual respect and growing affection. Sebastian told her about Catherine, about the pain of losing both wife and child in one terrible night. Rosalind shared her own history, the loneliness of being clever in a world that valued beauty, the humiliation of her family's fall, the fear she'd felt arriving at Ashford Hall. "I thought you hated me," she admitted one evening as they sat by the fire in the library. "I hated what you represented," Sebastian corrected, "the final proof of my failure. But you weren't a burden. You were a lifeline. I was drowning, and you pulled me to shore." "We pulled each other to shore," Rosalind said. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I want this to be a real marriage, Rosalind, not just a partnership, but something more. I want to court you properly, the way I should have from the beginning." "We're already married, Sebastian." "Then I'll court my wife, starting now." And he did. He brought her flowers from the greenhouse, winter roses and forced tulips. He commissioned a portrait of her to hang beside Catherine's in the gallery, not to replace his first wife, but to honour his second. He read to her in the evenings, introduced her to his favourite places on the estate, shared his dreams for Ashford Hall's future. Marcus continued to visit regularly, and Rosalind valued his friendship. But she noticed that Sebastian grew tense when the doctor was present, his manner becoming formal and guarded. "You're jealous," Lady Thornbury observed one afternoon when Sebastian had found an excuse to interrupt Rosalind and Marcus's conversation about agricultural chemistry. "I'm not jealous," Sebastian protested. "You absolutely are. You're afraid she prefers his company to yours." He makes her laugh. He understands her interests. He's not burdened by grief and guilt. "No, but he's not her husband. She chose you, Sebastian. Or rather, fate chose for both of you, but she's choosing to stay, choosing to build something with you. Don't let fear ruin that." Sebastian took the advice to heart. That evening, he found Rosalind in the morning room, working on plans for a new school for the tenant children. "I need to tell you something," he said, sitting beside her. I've been afraid that you'll realize you deserve better than a broken widower who bought you like property. Afraid that someone like Marcus, who's whole and uncomplicated, would be a better match." Rosalind set down her pen. "Sebastian, I don't want Marcus. I want you. Yes, our beginning was terrible. Yes, you were cold and distant and hurtful, but you've changed. We've both changed. We've built something real together." "I'm falling in love with you," Sebastian said, the words tumbling out. "I didn't think I could love again after Catherine, but you've proven me wrong. You're extraordinary, Rosalind. You're brilliant and brave, and you saved everything I hold dear. I love you." Rosalind felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too. I think I've loved you since the night you trusted me with the estate accounts, since you saw me as a partner instead of a burden." Sebastian cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing away a tear. "May I kiss you? Properly this time, not like that farce at our wedding. Please." The kiss was everything their wedding kiss hadn't been, warm, tender, full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I want to do this right," Sebastian said. "I want to give you the wedding you deserved, the courtship, the romance. Will you marry me again, Rosalind? In the spring, with all our friends and family, with joy instead of duty." "We're already married," Rosalind reminded him, laughing. "Then we'll renew our vows, please. Let me give you one beautiful memory to replace that awful day." How could she refuse? "Yes, I'll marry you again, Sebastian Ashford, as many times as you like." The renewal ceremony was planned for May, when the estate would be in full bloom. But there was one piece of unfinished business. In March, Blackwell's trial took place at the Assizes in Derby. Rosalind testified, presenting her evidence with calm precision. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning a guilty verdict. Blackwell was sentenced to 14 years transportation to Australia. As he was led from the courtroom, he looked at Rosalind with pure hatred. "You've destroyed me," he spat. "No," Rosalind replied calmly. "You destroyed yourself. I simply revealed the truth." After the trial, Sebastian took Rosalind to London for a fortnight. It was her first visit to the capital, and he delighted in showing her everything: the theatres, the museums, the parks. They attended balls and dinners where Rosalind was celebrated as the clever duchess who'd saved the Ashford estate. "You're famous," Sebastian teased as they waltzed at a ball hosted by Lady Thornbury's London friends. "I'm notorious," Rosalind corrected. "There's a difference. You're magnificent and you're mine." "Ours," Rosalind said. "We belong to each other now." They returned to Ashford Hall in April to find the estate transformed. With proper funding and management, repairs had been completed. The east wing was reopened, the gardens restored, the tenant farms thriving. The house felt alive again, full of purpose and hope. The renewal ceremony took place on a perfect May morning. This time, the chapel was filled with guests, tenant farmers and servants, local gentry and London friends, everyone who'd witnessed their journey. Rosalind wore a gown of cream silk embroidered with spring flowers, and Sebastian wore his family's ceremonial dress. But the most important difference was in their faces. Where their first wedding had been marked by resignation and duty, this ceremony radiated joy. When Sebastian took Rosalind's hand, his touch was warm and sure. When they exchanged vows, their voices rang with conviction. I, Sebastian, take you, Rosalind, to be my wife, my partner, my equal. I promise to honor your mind as much as your heart, to trust your judgment, to build our future together. I, Rosalind, take you, Sebastian, to be my husband, my partner, my equal. I promise to stand beside you in all things, to share both burdens and joys, to choose you every day for the rest of my life. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, again, Sebastian's kiss was neither perfunctory nor tentative. It was a promise, a celebration, a beginning. The wedding breakfast was everything the first had not been, full of laughter and music, genuine celebration instead of awkward obligation. Marcus proposed a toast that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure. Lady Thornbury declared it the finest wedding she'd ever attended. Even the servants were invited to join the festivities, dancing in the great hall as the sun set over the estate. That night, as Sebastian and Rosalind stood on the terrace looking out over Ashford Hall, he pulled her close. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what? For saving me, for saving this place, for loving me despite everything." "You saved me too," Rosalind replied. "You gave me purpose, partnership, a place to belong. We saved each other, Sebastian." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Come to bed, wife. Let me show you how much I love you." Mai and Rosalind, who had arrived at Ashford Hall as an unwanted burden, went willingly into her husband's arms, into the life they would build together, into the future they had both chosen. 18 months after her arrival at Ashford Hall, Rosalind stood in the newly completed conservatory, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching the first snow of winter fall outside. The glass-walled structure had been her idea, a place to grow exotic plants and conduct agricultural experiments year-round. Sebastian had built it for her as an anniversary gift, and it had become her favorite retreat. "There you are," Sebastian said, entering with their daughter Catherine Rose, balanced on his hip. At 10 months old, the baby had her mother's auburn hair and her father's grey eyes, and she ruled Ashford Hall with imperious infant authority. "Mama," Catherine squealed, reaching for Rosalind. "Hello, my darling," Rosalind said, taking the baby and kissing her soft cheek. "Have you been helping Papa with the accounts?" "She ate my correspondence," Sebastian said dryly. "I'm fairly certain the letter from our solicitor is now irretrievable." Rosalind laughed. "Then we'll simply have to write back and ask him to send another." Sebastian wrapped his arms around both wife and daughter, resting his chin on Rosalind's shoulder. "You shouldn't be standing so long. The doctor said I should rest when tired, not become an invalid," Rosalind interrupted. "I'm pregnant, Sebastian, not fragile. You're carrying my son. Or another daughter. Either way, your precious cargo." It was a familiar argument, conducted with affection rather than heat. Sebastian had become protective to the point of absurdity during her pregnancy, hovering and fretting despite Rosalind's perfect health. Life at Ashford Hall had settled into a rhythm of contentment. The estate was thriving under their joint management. Rosalind handled the accounts and planning, Sebastian managed the day-to-day operations, and Timothy Hodge coordinated everything with meticulous efficiency. The tenant farms were producing record yields, the investments were sound, and the duchy's finances were stronger than they'd been in a decade. But more than financial success, the estate had regained its heart. The house was filled with life again, servants who smiled and laughed, guests who visited regularly, children from the tenant farms who attended the new school Rosalind had established. The darkness that had hung over Ashford Hall after Catherine's death had lifted, replaced by hope and purpose. Rosalind had also found her own place in the wider world. She'd published a treatise on estate management under a pseudonym, which had been surprisingly well received in agricultural circles. Several other estates had quietly sought her advice on improving their accounting systems. She'd even been invited to address the Royal Agricultural Society, though she'd declined. Being a duchess was one thing, being a public intellectual quite another. "I received a letter from Marcus today," Sebastian said, swaying gently to soothe Catherine, who was growing drowsy. He's been offered a position at St. Bartholomew's Hospital in London. He's considering accepting. That's wonderful for him, Rosalind said, meaning it. Marcus had become a dear friend to both of them, his visits a highlight of their social calendar. He'll be brilliant there. He also mentioned that he's courting someone, a doctor's daughter from Edinburgh. Good, he deserves happiness. Sebastian kissed her temple. I was jealous of him, you know, in those early days. I know it was obvious. Was it really? Painfully so. Rosalind turned in his arms, careful not to jostle the sleeping baby. But you had no reason to be. I admired Marcus's mind, but I loved yours. I still do. Even when I'm being overprotective and absurd? Especially then. They stood together in the warm conservatory, watching snow fall over the estate they'd saved together, holding the daughter they'd created from love rather than duty, waiting for the son or daughter who would arrive in spring. Do you ever think about that first day? Sebastian asked quietly. When you arrived here and I was so cold to you? Sometimes, but only to appreciate how far we've come. I was drowning and I didn't even know it. I thought I was managing, coping, surviving, but I was just existing, going through motions. And then you came, and you saw everything I'd missed. You saved me, Rosalind. We saved each other, she corrected, as she always did. I was drowning too, Sebastian. Drowning in my father's failures, in society's expectations, in the belief that I was worthless because I was clever instead of compliant. You gave me purpose. You gave me partnership. You gave me love. I gave you a terrible wedding and months of coldness. And then you gave me everything else, a real marriage, a true partnership, a family, a home. Sebastian's eyes were bright with emotion. I love you, Rosalind Ashford, more than I thought I could ever love again. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. I love you too, even though you bought me like property. He winced. Must you remind me? Always. It keeps you humble. They laughed together, the sound echoing in the glass-walled space, and Catherine stirred but didn't wake. Later that evening, after the baby was settled in the nursery and they were preparing for bed, Sebastian asked, Do you ever regret it, the way we began? Rosalind considered the question seriously. No. I regret the circumstances, my father's gambling, your grief, the necessity that brought us together, but I don't regret the outcome. If we'd met differently at a ball or a house party, would you have seen me? Really seen me? Probably not, Sebastian admitted. I would have seen a pretty face and assumed that was all there was. Exactly. Our terrible beginning forced us to see each other truly. You learned I was more than decorative. I learned you were more than cold. We built something real from unpromising materials. Like alchemy, turning lead into gold. Like gardening, Rosalind corrected, thinking of her conservatory. Taking damaged soil and coaxing life from it. We bloomed where we were planted, Sebastian. Both of us. He pulled her close, his hands splaying across her belly where their second child grew. I want our children to know the truth. Not some romanticized version, but the real story. How we started as strangers in a transaction and became partners in everything. We'll tell them, Rosalind promised. We'll tell them that love isn't always instant or easy. Sometimes it's built slowly, through trust and respect and shared purpose. Sometimes the best marriages are the ones you have to work for. And sometimes, Sebastian said, kissing her softly, the wife you buy for Christmas turns out to be the greatest gift you ever received. Rosalind smiled against his lips. And sometimes the duke you're sold to turns out to be the love of your life. They made love that night with the tenderness of deep familiarity, the passion of genuine desire, and the gratitude of two people who knew how easily they might have missed each other. Afterward, lying in Sebastian's arms, Rosalind reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. She'd arrived at Ashford Hall expecting duty, obligation, and loneliness. She'd found purpose, partnership, and love. She'd saved an estate and gained a home. She'd married a stranger and discovered a soulmate. The next morning brought news that Blackwell had died in Australia, succumbing to fever in the penal colony. Rosalind felt no satisfaction at the news, only a distant sadness for a man who'd destroyed himself through greed. He could have had an honest life, she said to Lady Thornbury, who'd come to take tea. A good position, respect, security. But he wanted more, and it consumed him. Judun, some people are never satisfied, Lady Thornbury said. They're always looking elsewhere for happiness, never realizing it's within reach. You and Sebastian are the opposite. You took an impossible situation and made it beautiful. We were lucky. You were smart and brave and willing to work for what you wanted. Lady Thornbury patted Rosalind's hand. You've done more than save an estate, my dear. You've restored a family, revitalized a community, and proven that women's minds are just as valuable as men's. You're an inspiration. I'm just a duchess who's good with numbers. You're a woman who refused to be limited by others' expectations. That's revolutionary. As winter deepened and Christmas approached, Rosalind found herself thinking about the previous year, her wedding day, the humiliation at the breakfast, the cold distance between herself and Sebastian. How different everything was now. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after she'd presented Sebastian with evidence of Blackwell's theft, they hosted a grand ball. The house was decorated with evergreen boughs and holly, candles blazed in every window, and guests filled the rooms with laughter and music. Rosalind, resplendent in burgundy silk that accommodated her pregnancy, stood beside Sebastian to receive their guests. She watched him greet each person with genuine warmth, saw the respect in their eyes when they looked at him, and felt a surge of pride. This was the man he'd always been, beneath the grief and betrayal. She'd simply helped him find his way back. Happy? Sebastian murmured during a lull in arrivals. Completely. Even though you're enormous and uncomfortable and can't dance. Even though I'm carrying your child and glowing with maternal radiance, Rosalind corrected. That, too. He kissed her hand. Thank you for this year, Rosalind, for everything. Thank you for letting me help, for seeing me as an equal. Always. As midnight approached and the guests gathered in the great hall for champagne and toasts, Sebastian raised his glass. 1 year ago tonight, he said, his voice carrying across the room, my wife gave me an extraordinary Christmas gift. She gave me truth. She exposed the corruption that was destroying this estate, and in doing so, she saved everything I hold dear. But more than that, she gave me hope. She showed me that even the darkest situations can be transformed through intelligence, courage, and love. He turned to Rosalind, his eyes shining. You came here as a stranger, purchased like property, expected to be ornamental and obedient. Instead, you became my partner, my equal, my greatest blessing. You're the most remarkable woman I've ever known, and I thank God every day that your father was a terrible gambler. Laughter rippled through the crowd, and Rosalind felt tears on her cheeks. To the Duchess of Ashford, Sebastian concluded, raising his glass higher. The woman who saved my estate, restored my heart, and gave me a future worth living. To my wife, my love, my Rosalind. To the Duchess, the guests echoed, and the great hall rang with their voices. Later, as they stood together on the terrace watching snow fall over Ashford Hall, Rosalind leaned against Sebastian's chest and thought about the journey that had brought them here. She'd been so frightened that first night, so certain she was entering a prison. Instead, she'd found freedom to use her mind, to pursue her interests, to be herself fully and without apology. What are you thinking? Sebastian asked, his arms wrapped around her. That I'm grateful. For all of it, even the hard parts, they made us who we are. Wise and slightly mad. Partners, equals. A team. Sebastian rested his hand on her belly, feeling their child move beneath his palm. I can't wait to meet this one. To tell them about their mother, the brilliant woman who saved Ashford Hall. And their father, the Duke who learned to trust and love again. We'll tell them together. Everything. The good and the bad. The real story, Rosalind agreed. Not a fairy tale, but something better. A story about two people who chose each other day after day and built something lasting from unpromising beginnings. As the clock struck midnight and Christmas Day began, Sebastian turned Rosalind in his arms and kissed her deeply, thoroughly, with all the love he'd learned to express over their year together. Merry Christmas, wife. Merry Christmas, husband. And Rosalind Ashford, who had arrived at this estate expecting nothing but duty, looked around at the home she'd helped restore, the man she'd learned to love, the family they were building together, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. She had bloomed where she was planted, and the garden she'd cultivated was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. Thank you for listening to this story of love, redemption, and the power of partnership. If you enjoyed following Rosalind and Sebastian's journey from a cold transaction to a warm and lasting love, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. What part of their story resonated most with you? Have you ever found unexpected blessings in difficult circumstances? I'd love to hear your reflections. And if you know someone who would enjoy this tale of a clever duchess and the duke who learned to appreciate her, please share this story with them. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow from the rockiest soil.